Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today it's time for me to wrap up my March 2022 reading, so let's go take a look how I did. So for those of you who are familiar with my start of month scheduling, I would normally do a combined review of the previous month and a preview of the upcoming month as one video rather than doing separate TBR and wrap up videos each month. This month I am doing it as the separate videos though. You may have already seen my kind of mood readers pot rather than a set TBR that I've done for my April reading, as I'm taking part in the Realm of the Readathon, or Realmathon for short. If you haven't seen that kind of TBR style video, I'll link it up in the cards in the top corner. Go check that one out when you've watched this video. I hope that you enjoy it. So with the exception of the look ahead to the next month, I'll carry on with the usual kind of format in here. I will run through the stats for the previous month and the year to date first, and then we'll take a look at each of the individual books that I read in March, along with a kind of mini review for them. So when I was putting together my notes for this video, I thought that it seemed maybe a little bit low. I only read 4 books. There was a novella in there as well, but I only read 4 full-length novels, which seemed a little bit low for me and how I've been reading lately, which I take actually as a really good way to feel, because I've historically been quite a slow reader, and there are many times in the past where I would love to have been able to read 4 books in a month, and that I can consider 4 books or 4 books and a novella as maybe a little bit disappointing is a bit strange, but also is quite good for me because I'm loving the amount that I am reading at the moment. And the other thing to mention that you'll see in a moment when I talk through the actual stats themselves is that some of the books I was reading are actually quite chunky. The 3 that I've got physical copies of, I'll put it here for perspective, that is about the width of my head. So I had a really good month in terms of the actual page count as well. So looking at the actual stats then, the page count for those 4 books and a novella was 2,698, which is an average of 644 pages, which is absolutely massive. Even if I included the novella in that, for my stats, I do exclude short stories and novellas from the average page count because it skews that number a little bit too much. But even if I was to include the extra 120 pages, I think it was, for the novella and divide by 5 rather than 4, it would still come out as 540, which again is a really big number for an average. Looking at the ratings, so I had a really good month in terms of the volume of reading I was doing, but actually the quality of reading as well was phenomenal, and I had an average rating of 4.5 over these 5 books that I read. So I don't normally do kind of an advanced breakdown of the ratings of the books. I'll do that in a moment when I talk about them individually. But for this video, just to put it into kind of perspective, because that was a really good month and I'm really pleased with the quality that I was reading. I rated 3 of those 5 at 5 stars, 1 got a 4 star, and then 1 was a 3.5 star. Looking at the year-to-date figures, I'm currently on 7,135 pages as of the end of March, which is an average of 522, and the average rating that I've got is 4.07, so both in terms of quality and quantity, March was a really good month for me. Days since the last 5-star read, well, I had 3 of them in March, so it's not going to be a big number, and this one will be sitting at 10 days as of the date that this video goes out. For my series stats, there are a couple of changes this month because I started 2 new series, which takes me up to a total of 6 that I've started year to date. I haven't DNF'd or finished any series this year, and the series that I'm up to date with, so I've read all of the titles that have been released so far, it is now standing at 10, and the series that I've got ongoing, so these are the ones where whether there's a book released that I haven't read or whether it's one of the series that I'm up to date with, these are the series that I'm actively continuing. I will be picking up additional books in the series to continue with either when the next book is released or when I get round to reading the currently released books. So on to the books themselves, and I was just thinking that I had a particularly bad month in terms of my previous month's kind of TBR, my look ahead to what I was expecting or planning to read in March. As a mood reader, that's often the way I will generally kind of set myself 2 or 3 books that I really want to be reading. One of them, by the time I'm filming the video, I'm usually just starting as well, or just about to start, so that's kind of locked in. But in terms of the March look ahead, I was thinking to myself just now that I'd done particularly badly. But looking back at my notes, I actually did read 1, 2, 3, 4 of those titles that I listed. Fifth one I read 40% of, so I'll talk about that at the end of the video. And there's actually only 2 of the titles that I listed on there that I didn't get round to. So again, it's not as bad as I maybe thought it was. So the first book that I read in March was a carryover from February. I started it in February but didn't even get halfway through it, so I finished it in March, and that was The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. I really enjoyed this one, and you can see my dedicated review for it in the cards up in the top corner. This was a really good kind of epic fantasy which takes the classical fantasy kind of vibe and style and updates it and brings it to a modern audience. The writing style was definitely what you see in more modern fantasy rather than the classic styling of the fantasy books of the 70s and the 80s and maybe even the 90s. I really had a good time with this one and gave it 5 stars and a very high recommendation. I loved the characters and the way that they all interact, but there were a couple of characters in particular who I just really gelled with. They really helped me to get through this book, because it is a bit of a chonker. It's 800 and something pages, and these characters really helped it move along quite smoothly. So it didn't feel like it's an 800-page book, even though where I listened to it on audio it was coming in at, I think it was about 29 or 30 hours, if I remember correctly. I would say at its heart, The Ember Blade is a quest fantasy, but there's also a bit of a heist in there as well. It doesn't take up a big part of the book. The whole book isn't about the planning and the preparation and the kind of recruiting for this heist. It almost gets added on as an afterthought, but it does work well. It doesn't sound like it's something that's forced or that's just been put in to try and wrap the story up. Everything works quite nicely. The whole book is kind of gelled together quite nicely, so I definitely appreciate it. It's a high recommendation, and I'm looking forward to reading book 2 when that one comes out. Continuing with my 5-star read start to the month, I then read a novella which was The Citrine Key by L.L. McRae. This is the opening book, or the kind of the prequel book if you like, to the Dragon Spirits series, and again I had a really great time with this one. It serves as a fantastic introduction to Lauren McRae's work, and I think as a novella, just the way that it kind of stands alone, it's actually a really good, really enjoyable read. It introduces you to a couple of characters who are going to feature in the series itself, Dragon Spirits. It introduces you to the world and to the magic and to the actual dragon spirits that give the series its name. And of course it introduces you to the author's writing. So everything that I look for in one of these prequel novellas, a novella set in the world of the wider series, to serve for me as an introduction to world, characters, events, storyline, and of course author. This worked really well. It did everything that I wanted to, and obviously the enjoyment factor was definitely there as well, making me really excited to carry on reading and move on to The Iron Crown. So that's exactly what I did next. My next read was The Iron Crown by L.L. McRae, and this again was absolutely fantastic. It took me a long time to read compared to how my reading has been lately. Part of that I've thought in my dedicated review, which once again in the top corner you'll find a link to. Part of the kind of slowness I felt was because the chapters were typically quite long, and it's not that it was taking me a long time to read each chapter relative to the page count of the chapter, but it was more a case of I was only reading one chapter at a time. Normally, as I said in my dedicated review, I'll read in the bath or I'll read in bed before going to sleep, and I'll kind of turn a page, see the end of a chapter and think, oh, I'll just do one more chapter. Whereas with The Iron Crown, knowing that these chapters were 20, 25, 30 minutes long as I was reading on the Kindle, I wasn't doing that. I wasn't turning the page and thinking, oh, I'll just do another chapter, because I knew that I was unlikely to get to the end of it before I needed to put the book down. And the type of reader I am, I like to finish a reading session at the end of a chapter. So that was my one criticism that I mentioned in my review, but if you take that out of it, 'cause that's not really kind of the book's fault, if you like, The Iron Crown was fantastic. It got a really high rating in my weighted rating scale. It's the best book I would say that I've read this year, and again, as I said in my dedicated review, I fully expect it to be in the conversation when I'm looking at the end of the year back at what I've read and thinking which was my favourite book of the year. What books make up the top 10 of all the ones that I read in 2022? So a definite recommendation for The Iron Crown, and The Citrine Key as the prequel novella is a great introduction to the series as well. Okay, so next up for me, I went back to a series that I started back in June, I think it was, or maybe even May, for when I actually started reading book 1 in 2021, and that is The Farseer by Robin Hobb. So I read book 2, Royal Assassin. This was a little bit of a strange one for me. Again, it's a nice big chunky book, 650 or so pages, and although it was enjoyable, it didn't set the world alight for me. I know plenty of people who absolutely love Robin Hobb, The Realm of the Elderlings and the Farseer trilogy, and everyone has their own opinions and it's absolutely fine. For me, I'm just not feeling it as yet. I'm enjoying the overall writing style, I'm enjoying the overall story, the characters, but it's just not quite pulling itself all together for me and making me really want to go out and just pick up the next book straight away. So that's why it's taken me a good number of months to go from Assassin's Apprentice to Royal Assassin. I don't know how long it'll take me to move on to Assassin's Quest, bearing in mind that it is, again, a bigger book. This trilogy is definitely increasing in size with each book as you progress through it. Because it's the last book in the series though, my aim is to go on to book 3 before too long, so I don't want it just kind of hanging over me, but we'll see how we go with that one and when I'm kind of in the mood for it. Now, in terms of the book itself, I've said to a few people on Discord, Royal Assassin pretty much landed exactly where Assassin's Apprentice landed for me. I read Assassin's Apprentice and again, I enjoyed it, but it didn't set the world alight. I was on board with pretty much everything that happened, all of the characters, the story, the setting, the writing, but it kind of just muddled through for 80-85%, and then the last 10, 15, 20% was where things really picked up and got my interest in the book. That's exactly what happened with this one as well. It was just that last 10, 15, 20% that things really started to happen. It was almost like Robin Hobb had been writing this book and just trundling along quite nicely, and then realised, actually, I need to wrap this up. I've still got quite a lot that needs to be packed in here. So the last part of the book definitely raised the stakes for me, exactly the same as I felt for Assassin's Apprentice, but overall it landed at pretty much the same spot as Assassin's Apprentice, which for me was a 3.5 star. Now, as I say, I am going to continue with Assassin's Quest. I'm looking forward to it because I want to carry on. I've heard mixed things, some saying it's the best, some saying it's the, should we say, the least favourite in the series. So I'm not sure where it's going to land for me, given how I felt about the first 2 books, but we'll see when I get to it. And then novel number 4, book number 5 that I read in March was part of a buddy read that I'm doing with my friend Nina. We're reading the Tide Child trilogy by R.J. Barker over February, March and April. So in March, middle month, we read book 2, which was Call of the Bone Chips. And I found this was a definite improvement to book 1, The Bone Chips. With The Bone Chips, it was very kind of heavy on the world building. There was lots of new terminology, lots to learn, lots to get your head around, and that kind of detracted a little bit for me from enjoying the actual book itself. With Call of the Bone Chips, we've got pretty much all of that out of the way. I know about the world, I know about the kind of strange terminology, I know what's going on and what the overall storyline is. So for me, it's kind of a perfect example of a book 2 or a subsequent book in a new fantasy series. Book 1 gets all the world building out of the way, so for me, I tend to find it maybe a little bit slower, maybe not quite as good, and then for book 2 and onwards, I find, generally speaking, that my enjoyment of the books in the series increases with each new instalment. So I'm hoping that's the way that the Tide Child trilogy is going to go, because it definitely worked that way for me with the first 2 books. So book 1, I think I went 3.5 stars for the Bone Chips. Book 2, Call of the Bone Chips, was a solid 4 stars for me. I didn't think it was a 3.5 or a 4.5. It just landed really nicely in my kind of gut feeling as a 4-star read. And overall, I thought it was really action-packed. It didn't really let up for a moment. This is one that I did on audio, and maybe it's easier to kind of get that impression when you're listening to it rather than reading it. But there was just so much happening in this one. As I say, it didn't seem to let up at all. So it was really fast paced, but not too fast paced. And there was so much happening. It was easy to miss it a little bit on audio. And for me, it actually really helped doing this as a buddy read, because when we'd both finished it, Nina and I were talking on Discord, and we were going back and forth with a couple of little bits that we didn't quite catch and filling in the gaps for each other. So I really appreciated that actually, and it helped my enjoyment of the book itself. But overall, even without that, I still really enjoyed this book. It's definitely a bit of a weird one in terms of the kind of the world and a lot of the terminology that's used and things like that. But once you get used to it, I mean, I had a really good time with it. I've heard so much about the Bone Ship's Wake, the third book in the series, and I'm really looking forward to it and to seeing if I have kind of the same experience as so many of the people I've seen talking about it on Twitter have already had. Now, in terms of the reading that I kind of planned to do in March, there was one other book that was a definite because it was an advanced review copy of a book that's released in April, and that is The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, which, as you can see, I do like John Gwynne. I've been reading his books ever since Malice came out, which is why I've been able to get the hardback copies, because I bought them when they were new as they came out each year. And he's definitely one of my favourite authors, if not the actual #1 favourite author that I have at the moment. So this is a book that I was really looking forward to. Where the Iron Crown took me a bit longer to read than I'd anticipated, I didn't get to Hunger of the Gods until late in March, so I hadn't finished it. I read about 40% of it on the digital review copy on my Kindle, and I'm continuing with this one into April. Now, as at the time of filming, I am close to the end of this one, so you'll be able to see my full thoughts on it in a dedicated review coming up on the channel probably this week. In terms of my other April reads, for those who are familiar with the normal review and preview that I do, in case you missed it at the start of the video, I'm separating them out this month because I had 14 books, 15 if you include The Hunger of the Gods, but I had 14 books that I went through for my April MBR, my might be read kind of pot of books to choose from for Realm of the Readathon. So again, that was linked in the cards at the start of the video. I'll put a link to it in the description box below as well. If you want to see what I'm planning to read for April, go check that video out because it's got all of the details there. Let me know in the comments down below, as always, how your reading month went, and again, what you're looking forward to reading in April, because we'd normally have that conversation at this point as well. In the description box, as always, you'll find links to all of my social media where you can connect with me on Twitter and Instagram and Goodreads, support the channel through my Ko-fi page, and take a look at my Amazon wishlist if you want to. That's it for today. I hope you all had a great March and you're looking forward to a great April. I'll hopefully see you in the next video, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.